I never thought I'd be the guy whose life unravels in just a few weeks. You hear stories about people who go through it, friends of friends, coworkers, neighbors, but you never expect that you'll be the next name whispered in those conversations. But here I am, sitting in my car, staring at the front of my house, wondering how the hell everything went so wrong so fast. It all started about a month ago, or at least that's when I started paying attention to the signs. I've been married to Sarah for 12 years now, and for most of that time, I thought we had a good life. A stable one, at least. She's always been a little high-strung, sure, but I chalked it up to her personality. I used to find it cute, endearing, even her passion, her energy. She was the type who could light up a room, talk a mile a minute, and leave everyone in her wake. But lately, that energy has shifted. It's not directed at me anymore, and it's not the kind of energy you ignore when you've been married as long as we have. I'm Mike, by the way. Just turned 41. I work as a project manager at a construction company, and I'm one of those guys who's always tried to do the right thing, steady job, decent house, good with the kids. We've got two, Jake and Emily, 8 and 6. I've always prided myself on being a good dad, the kind who takes time off to be at soccer games, who plans weekends around their activities. I figured Sarah and I had it all figured out. But, man, I was wrong. It's the little things that get you at first. She started going out more, saying she needed me time, which I respected. God knows she's earned it, being a stay-at-home mom for the last few years. But it wasn't just about going out to the gym or catching up with friends. There was something in the way she got ready that didn't sit right with me. She started dressing up like she was going on dates, tight dresses, makeup that took hours to perfect, the perfume I hadn't smelled in months. And then there were the texts. She'd be glued to her phone, giggling like a teenager, hiding the screen whenever I walked into the room. At first, I didn't want to believe anything was wrong. I convinced myself I was just being paranoid, that this was what marriage looks like after a decade. Hell, maybe it was my fault for letting things get stale. But then came the excuses, the late nights where she claimed to be with her friends but wouldn't pick up her phone when I called. And when she did come home, her mood was all over the place. Sometimes she'd be overly sweet, other times distant and cold. I'll never forget the night it clicked for me. She came home late again, half drunk, laughing at something on her phone. I asked her where she'd been, and she snapped at me, like I had no right to even ask. That's when I knew something was off. But I couldn't prove it, not yet. I tried to brush it off, ignore it for the kids' sake, but it gnawed at me. The next few weeks were unbearable. Every time her phone buzzed, I felt my stomach drop. I'd lie awake at night, replaying every conversation we'd had, every moment where things felt off. It was driving me insane. I knew I had to find out what was going on, but part of me didn't want to. Part of me was terrified of what I'd uncover. But eventually, the signs became too much to ignore. I had to know the truth. And that's how it all started to unravel. A couple of days after that night when Sarah snapped at me, I knew I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. The thought of her with someone else was like a virus in my brain. It was all I could think about. I couldn't eat, couldn't focus at work, and the worst part was, I didn't know who this other guy was. The idea of some faceless stranger messing with my life, my family, drove me crazy. I started paying more attention, looking for clues. Every time her phone buzzed, I'd make note of the time. I checked her calendar when she wasn't around, trying to see if anything didn't add up. I even went so far as to check the mileage on her car a couple of times. It was pathetic, but I didn't care. I just needed something solid to confirm what I already knew deep down. Then, last Tuesday, she told me she was going out again, meeting some friends for dinner. She dressed up way more than necessary for a casual dinner with her friends, and I could smell that same perfume, the one she hadn't worn for me in months. I watched her leave, my mind already spinning, trying to decide what to do. I couldn't just sit there like an idiot, waiting for her to come home and feed me some half-assed excuse about why she was late. So I decided to follow her. I'm not proud of it. It's not something I ever thought I'd do, but I was desperate for the truth. I waited about 10 minutes after she left and then grabbed my keys and followed. It wasn't hard to keep my distance, she didn't suspect a thing. After about 20 minutes of driving, she turned into the parking lot of a park, one of those places couples go to get some privacy. My heart started racing as I watched her park the car and step out, looking around like she was checking to see if anyone was watching. That's when I saw him. He pulled up in a car not far from hers, and I swear, my blood turned to ice when I saw them greet each other. He was younger than me, maybe mid-30s, tall, and definitely in shape. He walked up to her like he owned her, like I didn't even exist. And then they kissed. Not some innocent peck on the cheek either, no, this was a full-on, passionate kiss. The kind of kiss that says everything without a word. I should have lost it right there. I wanted to run up to them and knock this guy out cold, but something stopped me. Maybe it was shock, or maybe it was the sinking feeling that this had been going on for a lot longer than I wanted to admit. Instead, I just stood there, frozen, watching my wife make out with this guy like I was invisible, like the last 12 years of our marriage didn't mean a damn thing to her. After what felt like an eternity, I couldn't take it anymore. My legs moved before my brain caught up, and I was halfway across the parking lot before I even knew what I was doing. When I got close enough, they broke apart, Sarah's eyes going wide when she saw me. The color drained from her face, and for a second, she just stood there, speechless, her mouth opening and closing like she was trying to come up with an excuse. Mike, she finally managed, but I cut her off. Save it, I growled, not even looking at her. My eyes were locked on him. The guy looked at me, then back at her, like he wasn't sure if he should run or stand his ground. He chose the wrong option. What the hell do you think you're doing with my wife? I demanded, my voice low, barely controlled. He tried to act tough, standing up straighter and puffing out his chest, but I could see the fear in his eyes. It's not what you think, man. We were just. Shut the hell up, I snapped, taking a step closer. My fists were clenched so tight I could feel my nails digging into my palms, but I didn't care. All I could think about was wiping that smug look off his face. I wasn't going to let him talk his way out of this. I shoved him hard. He stumbled back a few steps, but he didn't fall. Sarah rushed between us, her hands on my chest, trying to push me back. Mike, stop, she shouted. Please, just stop. But I wasn't listening. The anger was boiling over, and I couldn't hold it in anymore. I grabbed the guy by the collar and pulled him close, my face inches from his. You have any idea what you've done? I hissed. You think this is some game? You think you can just mess with my wife, my family? Man, just let me go, all right? I didn't know, he stammered, trying to pull free, but I held on tight. He wasn't getting away that easy. I thought about hitting him. I wanted to so bad. But then I thought about Jake and Emily, and how the last thing I needed was to get arrested for assault. So instead, I pushed him back again, harder this time, and he stumbled to the ground, landing on his ass in the dirt. That's when I heard the voice. Hey! What the hell's going on over there? I looked up and saw two people standing by a nearby bench, one of them already pulling out their phone. Great! Just what I needed, an audience. Before I could react, I heard them shout, I'm calling the cops. The guy scrambled to his feet, his face pale, wiping dirt off his jeans. Sarah looked between me and him, her eyes wide with panic. Mike, let's just go home, okay? Let's talk about this, she pleaded, grabbing my arm. Talk about what, Sarah? I spat, pulling my arm free from her grip. About how you've been screwing this guy behind my back? About how you've been lying to me for God knows how long? She winced, looking around nervously as more people started to notice the commotion. But before she could say anything, I heard the distant sound of sirens. The guy panicked, looking over his shoulder and muttering, I'm not sticking around for this, before bolting to his car. He sped off before I could even think about stopping him. Sarah reached for me again, her voice softer now, almost pleading. Mike, please, let's go. We can talk about this at home. But I couldn't move. I stood there, watching the taillights of that guy's car disappear, my heart pounding, my mind racing with a million thoughts. I had caught her. I had seen it with my own eyes. And yet, standing there in that park, I still couldn't fully wrap my head around it. The police arrived a few minutes later, two officers stepping out of their car and heading straight for me. They asked what was going on, and I explained as calmly as I could, though I was still shaking with anger. One of the officers looked at me, then at Sarah, and asked if I wanted to press charges. I shook my head, the adrenaline finally wearing off, leaving me exhausted and sick to my stomach. "No," I muttered, my voice barely above a whisper. "I just want to go home." The car ride home was silent. Sarah sat next to me, fidgeting with the hem of her dress, glancing over at me every few minutes, but I refused to look at her. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so tight, I thought I might snap it in half. Every second that passed, the anger simmered just below the surface, threatening to boil over again. I replayed the scene in my head, over and over, the way she kissed that guy, how she didn't even flinch when I caught them. The betrayal was like a punch to the gut, and I still felt winded from it. 12 years of marriage, and it all came crashing down in one moment. And the worst part? She didn't even seem sorry. We pulled into the driveway, and I turned off the engine, but I didn't get out of the car. Sarah finally broke the silence. "Mike," she started, but I cut her off. "Not here," I snapped, my voice sharp. "We'll talk inside." We got out of the car and walked into the house like two strangers. The kids were at my mom's for the night, thank God, so we didn't have to deal with any questions or confused looks. I slammed the door behind us, and the sound echoed through the house. I turned to face her, and she just stood there, looking at the floor, avoiding my gaze. "Start talking," I said, my voice low, barely controlled. "I want to hear you say it." She didn't say anything at first, just stood there wringing her hands like a scolded child. I could feel my blood pressure rising with every second of silence. "Say it!" I shouted, making her jump. "Mike, it wasn't like that," she finally said, her voice small. She looked up at me, and for a split second, I saw a flicker of fear in her eyes. But it was quickly replaced by that familiar defensive tone she'd been using for weeks. "I swear, it just happened. I didn't mean for it to." "Didn't mean for it to?" I repeated, incredulous. I took a step toward her, and she backed up instinctively. "You kissed him, Sarah. You've been sneaking around with this guy for God knows how long, and you didn't mean for it to happen? How stupid do you think I am?" She bit her lip, crossing her arms over her chest like she was trying to protect herself. "I don't know," she whispered. "I don't know what happened, Mike. Things just got out of control." I laughed bitterly. "Out of control? You think that excuses what you did? What, you just accidentally tripped and fell into his arms? I wasn't born yesterday, Sarah." Her eyes flashed with anger then, and I could see the switch in her. She dropped the apologetic act and went straight into defensive mode. "Oh, come on, Mike," she snapped, throwing her hands in the air. "It's not like you've been around much lately. You're always working, always too tired to talk to me, too tired for anything. What did you expect me to do? What did I expect you to do?" I repeated, disbelief washing over me. "I expected you to be my wife, Sarah. To be faithful. Is that really too much to ask?" She scoffed, shaking her head like I was being ridiculous. "Faithful," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Mike, we haven't even had sex in months. You're always too busy, too stressed, too everything. And you want to stand here and pretend like I'm the only one at fault?" I stared at her, my heart pounding in my chest. She was really trying to make this my fault. After everything I had just seen, after all the lies, she still had the nerve to stand here and blame me. "You think this is because of our sex life?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. "You think that excuses you running around behind my back? Lying to me? Kissing another man?" She didn't answer, just crossed her arms tighter and looked away, like she couldn't be bothered to even meet my eyes. "Who is he?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. I needed answers. I needed to know everything. "What's his name?" "Mike, it doesn't matter," she started, but I cut her off. "It matters to me," I said through gritted teeth. "Who is he, Sarah?" Tell me. She sighed, rubbing her temples like this was exhausting for her, like I was exhausting her. His name is Jason, she muttered. He's someone I met at the gym. The gym? I repeated, shaking my head in disbelief. So all those nights you said you were out with friends, you were actually with him? She hesitated, and that was all the answer I needed. I felt sick. How long? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Mike, please, she tried, but I wasn't letting her off the hook that easy. How long? I shouted, taking a step closer, my fists clenched at my sides. How long has this been going on, Sarah? She flinched at the volume of my voice but didn't move away. A few months, she admitted quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. But it didn't mean anything, I swear. I let out a bitter laugh, running my hands through my hair in frustration. Didn't mean anything? I repeated. You've been lying to me, sneaking around with this guy for months, and you want me to believe it didn't mean anything? Tears welled up in her eyes, and she wiped them away quickly, like she didn't want me to see her cry. But I wasn't buying it. Not anymore. I was lonely, she said, her voice breaking. You don't know what it's like, Mike. You're always working, always stressed. I felt like I was invisible. Jason made me feel seen. I shook my head, unable to believe what I was hearing. You felt invisible? So your solution was to cheat on me? To destroy our family? I didn't want to destroy anything, she cried, her voice rising. I didn't plan this, Mike. It just happened. You don't understand what it's been like for me, staying home with the kids, doing everything by myself while you're out working all the time. I just needed something for me. I couldn't take it anymore. The anger, the betrayal, the sheer audacity of her trying to play the victim, it was too much. I turned away from her, pacing the living room, trying to get my emotions under control. So, what now? I asked after a long silence. You want a divorce? Is that what this is all leading to? She didn't answer right away, and when I turned to face her again, she looked torn. No, she whispered. I don't want a divorce. I don't want to break up our family, Mike. I laughed bitterly. Well, you've done a hell of a job at keeping it together so far. Her tears were flowing freely now, and she took a step toward me, reaching out to touch my arm. I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice shaky. I know I screwed up. I know I hurt you. But I love you, Mike. I don't want to lose you. I pulled my arm away from her touch, the disgust and anger rising up again. Love me? I spat. You don't get to say you love me, Sarah. Not after this. She broke down then, sobbing into her hands, but I couldn't bring myself to comfort her. The woman I thought I knew, the woman I had loved for over a decade, was gone. All that was left was the betrayal, the lies, and the hollow apology she was offering me now. I need some time, I muttered, walking toward the door. I can't be around you right now. Mike, please don't go, she begged, following me, but I didn't stop. I grabbed my keys and slammed the door behind me as I left. I didn't know where I was going or what the hell I was supposed to do next. All I knew was that I couldn't stay in that house, not with her, not after everything I just learned. I spent the next few hours driving around aimlessly, my mind racing, replaying everything Sarah said. I couldn't believe the audacity of it all, her trying to justify it, blaming me for not being around, for working too much, for doing what I had to do to keep the family afloat. And then she had the nerve to say she didn't want to lose me? That she still loved me? No, she didn't love me. If she had, she wouldn't have spent months sneaking around with some guy she met at the gym. She wouldn't have kissed him like that, right in front of me. As I drove, the anger turned to something darker. A part of me felt like I was losing control, like I was slipping into a version of myself I didn't recognize, but I didn't care. Sarah didn't get to walk away from this without paying the price. She didn't get to destroy everything we had, lie to my face, and then cry her way out of it like she was the victim. No, if she thought I'd just forgive her and we'd move on, she was about to learn the hard way that actions have consequences. When I finally got home, it was late. The house was quiet, and Sarah had gone to bed. I stood in the dark living room, staring at the staircase, feeling the weight of what I was about to do. I could hear her soft breathing coming from our bedroom upstairs, completely oblivious to what was coming next. That's when the plan started forming in my mind. It wasn't enough to just confront her, to make her cry and beg for forgiveness. No, I wanted her to suffer the way I was suffering. I wanted her to feel the pain of betrayal, to know what it was like to be humiliated, to have everything ripped away from her. And I knew exactly how to do it. The first thing I did was check her phone. She was asleep, so it was easy to grab it from her nightstand. I wasn't sure if I'd find anything new, but I wanted to see if she had been messaging this guy after our confrontation. Sure enough, there were a few texts from him, nothing incriminating, just checking in on her. I guess he was too scared to come out and ask if I'd beaten the crap out of him, but that didn't matter. What mattered was that he was still in the picture. I took a screenshot of the messages and sent them to myself. Then I deleted the evidence from her phone and put it back where I found it. That was just the beginning. The next step was finding out more about this Jason guy. If Sarah thought she could keep sneaking around with him, she was about to get a rude awakening. I stayed up late, digging through her social media, cross-referencing every little detail until I found his profile. He was exactly what I expected, some wannabe gym rat with more muscles than brains. His profile was full of pictures of him flexing at the gym, living his best life without a care in the world. But what interested me more were the comments. Turns out, Jason wasn't just a side fling for my wife, he had a whole other life. Married. Kids. And his wife had no idea what kind of scumbag she was married to. Perfect. Over the next few days, I went about my business like nothing had happened. I was calm, collected, and didn't raise any suspicion. I didn't want Sarah to know I was plotting something. Let her think we were on shaky ground but still figuring things out. I played the part of the hurt, distant husband, while she went about her day trying to make things right, acting like she wanted to fix our marriage. But I had already set everything in motion. The first part of my plan was to blow up Jason's life. I didn't just want to ruin Sarah, I wanted him to suffer too. He deserved to pay for touching what was mine. So I waited for the right moment and reached out to Jason's wife. I crafted an anonymous email, attaching the screenshots of his texts with Sarah, and even included a few key details to make sure she couldn't deny it. Nothing too crazy, just enough to plant the seed of doubt in her mind. Then I sat back and waited for the explosion. It didn't take long. Within a couple of days, I heard from a mutual acquaintance that Jason's marriage was on the rocks. His wife had apparently confronted him about the messages, and from what I could gather, it wasn't going well for him. I pictured the look on his face when she showed him those screenshots, his pathetic attempts to deny it, and it brought me a sick sense of satisfaction. But that wasn't enough. Not by a long shot. Sarah's turn was coming. She was still trying to play the good wife, acting like she wanted to make amends, but I could see right through it. It was all an act, and I wasn't buying any of it. I didn't confront her again, not yet. Instead, I decided to chip away at her sanity, slowly but surely. I started by messing with her things. Small stuff at first, things she wouldn't notice right away. I'd move her keys to a different spot, mess with her makeup, delete some of her contacts from her phone. She'd think she was just being forgetful, or that the kids had misplaced something, but it was all me. I wanted her to feel unsettled, to question everything around her. Then I ramped it up. One night, after she'd gone to bed, I logged into her social media accounts and made a few subtle changes. Nothing too obvious, just enough to raise some eyebrows. I changed her relationship status to "It's complicated," and liked a few of Jason's old photos from months back. I knew people would notice, especially her friends, and I wanted the gossip to start spreading. The next day, she was frantic. She came downstairs, her phone in hand, looking confused and pissed off. "Mike, did you do something to my Facebook?" she asked, her voice laced with accusation. I shrugged, playing dumb. "Why would I do that?" "Maybe you hit something by mistake." She narrowed her eyes at me, clearly not buying it, but she couldn't prove anything. Well, someone messed with it. Now everyone's asking me what's going on. Sounds like a personal problem, I said, sipping my coffee and pretending like I didn't care. She stormed off, frustrated, and I could feel the tension building. It was only a matter of time before she cracked. And crack she did. A few days later, she was on edge, constantly checking her phone, paranoid about what people were saying behind her back. Her friends had started texting her, asking questions about why she was liking Jason's pictures, what was going on with our marriage, and she had no idea how to explain it. I kept my distance, watching as she spiraled further into her own mess, all while pretending I didn't notice. But I wasn't done yet. Not even close. The final step in my plan came one evening when she was out, supposedly meeting a friend for coffee. I took her laptop, went through her emails, and found what I was looking for: emails between her and Jason, discussing how they were going to lay low for a while, just until things cooled off. I forwarded those emails to everyone in her contact list. Her friends. Her family. Even some of her old coworkers. By the time she got home that night, her phone was blowing up. I was sitting on the couch, pretending to watch TV, while she frantically scrolled through her phone, her face pale and panicked. She didn't say anything to me, but I could hear her phone buzzing nonstop, one message after another. She knew. When she finally turned to me, her face was pale, her voice trembling. "Mike, did you do this?" I didn't even look at her. I just smiled and said, "What do you think?" She stared at me, speechless, tears welling up in her eyes. "Why? Why are you doing this to me?" I stood up, towering over her, the anger finally boiling over. "You destroyed our marriage, Sarah. You lied to me. You betrayed me. You think you're the victim here? No, you brought this on yourself." Her knees buckled, and she collapsed onto the couch, sobbing into her hands, but I didn't care. I felt nothing for her at that moment, no pity, no sympathy, no love. Just a cold satisfaction that she was finally feeling the pain she deserved. This was just the beginning. Sarah thought she could walk all over me, treat me like a fool, but she was about to learn the hard way that revenge doesn't come without a price. A few weeks had passed since I blew Sarah's life to pieces. In those weeks, she had gone from hysterical to defeated, like she was a shell of the woman she once was. The smugness, the attitude, the arrogance, it had all been wiped away. Now, she was walking around like a ghost in our own house, barely able to look me in the eye. I was fine with it. She had earned every ounce of suffering she was going through. But as much as I enjoyed watching her squirm, I knew this had to come to an end eventually. We couldn't go on living like this, trapped in a house full of tension and unspoken anger. She was miserable, and honestly, I was getting tired of pretending I could ignore her. The silence was becoming suffocating. One night, after the kids were asleep, I decided it was time to confront her one last time. I needed to know where we stood, what was going to happen next, and if there was even a point in dragging this out any longer. I found her sitting at the kitchen table, staring blankly at a glass of wine. She looked up when I walked in, her eyes bloodshot, a deep sadness etched into her face. For a second, I almost felt bad for her, almost. But then I remembered everything she'd done, and the pity vanished as quickly as it had come. "We need to talk," I said, pulling out a chair across from her. She nodded, not saying a word. She just sat there, waiting for me to start. I leaned back in my chair, studying her for a moment before I spoke. "What now, Sarah? What the hell are we going to do now?" She sighed heavily, running her fingers through her hair. "I don't know, Mike. I don't know what to do anymore." "Well, you're going to have to figure it out," I said, my voice firm but not angry. "We can't keep going like this. It's not fair to the kids, and it's definitely not fair to either of us." "I know," she whispered, staring down at her hands. "I know I messed everything up. I don't even recognize myself anymore." There was a long pause as we both sat in the silence, the weight of everything we had been through hanging in the air between us. "I loved you," I said quietly, surprising even myself with how soft my voice was. "I really did. And you just threw it all away." Tears welled up in her eyes, but she didn't wipe them away. I know. I'm so sorry, Mike. I don't know what I was thinking. I wasn't thinking. I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head. That's the thing, Sarah. You were thinking. You were thinking about yourself. You didn't care about me, or the kids, or what this would do to us. You just cared about what you wanted, about feeling good in the moment. She nodded, unable to argue with me. You're right. I was selfish. I was stupid. There was another long silence. This time, it was me who broke it. Do you still love him? I asked, my voice steady, though I wasn't sure if I really wanted to hear the answer. She shook her head quickly, her eyes widening as she looked at me. No. God, no. I don't even know why I did it. I thought I was in love with him, but it was just... I don't know. It was stupid, and I hate myself for it. Good, I muttered, leaning forward and resting my elbows on the table. Because if you were still hung up on him, I don't think we'd be having this conversation. Sarah nodded, wiping away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. I don't want him. I don't want anyone else. I just want to fix this, if that's even possible. Fix this? I repeated, shaking my head. How do you expect to fix this, Sarah? You can't undo what you did. You can't take it back. I know, she whispered, her voice breaking. But I'll do anything, Mike. I swear. I'll go to counseling, I'll be better. I'll do whatever you need me to do. I looked at her, seeing the desperation in her eyes, and I realized something. As much as I wanted her to suffer, as much as I wanted her to feel every bit of the pain she'd caused me, I wasn't sure if I could drag this out anymore. Revenge had its place, and I had certainly had my fill, but now? Now I just felt tired. I don't know if I can forgive you, Sarah, I said quietly. I really don't. She didn't say anything, just sat there, her eyes filled with silent tears, waiting for me to continue. But, for the kid's sake, I think we need to at least try to figure out what comes next. She nodded quickly, her voice trembling. I'll do whatever it takes, Mike. I swear. I don't want to lose you. You already lost me, I said, my voice flat. What we had. It's over. I'm not the same person I was before this. And you're not the same woman I married. I don't think I'll ever be able to look at you the same way again. The truth hung in the air between us, heavy and suffocating. She knew it. I knew it. There was no going back to the way things were. Not after everything she had done. But the kids, I continued, my voice softer now. They don't deserve to have their lives torn apart because of this. So we need to be smart about what we do next. She wiped her eyes again, nodding slowly. I understand. We sat there in silence for a while, neither of us knowing what to say. The anger was gone, replaced by a hollow sadness that seemed to hang in the air, suffocating the both of us. Finally, Sarah broke the silence. Do you think we can ever fix this? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel hatred or betrayal. I just felt empty. I don't know, I said honestly. Maybe. But it's not going to be easy, and it's not going to be quick. And I don't know if I have it in me to try. She swallowed hard, her lips trembling. I'll do anything, Mike. Please. I didn't respond. I wasn't ready to make any promises, not yet. There was still too much hurt, too much damage. But I knew one thing for sure, this wasn't over. Not yet. The weeks that followed were a strange mix of calm and chaos. On the surface, things had returned to a kind of uneasy normalcy. Sarah and I didn't talk much, except when it came to the kids. She was walking on eggshells around me, constantly trying to make things right in the smallest ways, cooking my favorite meals, sending me text messages asking how my day was, trying to act like the perfect wife. But it was all an act, and we both knew it. The damage was done, and no amount of superficial kindness was going to undo that. I still hadn't made a decision about what to do, but the idea of staying with her, of pretending like we could just sweep everything under the rug, was becoming more unbearable by the day. Every time I looked at her, all I saw was her with Jason, her betrayal, her lies. I couldn't even sleep in the same bed anymore. The guest room had become my new home, and every night, I'd lie awake, thinking about how everything had fallen apart so quickly. Then, one afternoon, I got a call from Jason's wife. She had finally kicked him out, and she wanted to talk. I had no idea how she got my number, but when I heard her voice on the other end of the line, I felt a strange sense of solidarity. She was hurt, betrayed, just like me. She told me about the fights they had been having, about how Jason had tried to deny everything at first but eventually came clean. Apparently, Sarah wasn't the first woman he had cheated with. He had a history of affairs, one after another. Hearing that didn't make me feel any better. If anything, it made me feel worse. Sarah had thrown away everything we had for a man who wasn't even worth it. A man who didn't care about her, or his wife, or anyone but himself. That was the final nail in the coffin for me. I knew then that I couldn't stay married to Sarah. She had destroyed any chance we had at happiness, and the thought of spending the rest of my life with her, knowing what she'd done, was unbearable. The next morning, I told her. We were sitting at the kitchen table, the kids already at school, and she was nervously picking at her food. I hadn't said a word since I sat down, just sipping my coffee, trying to find the right way to say it. Finally, I put the mug down and looked her straight in the eye. "We're getting a divorce." Her face went pale, and for a moment, she didn't say anything. She just stared at me like she hadn't heard me correctly. "Mike, no, please, we can't." "I've made up my mind," I said, cutting her off. "There's no point in dragging this out any longer. You and I both know this marriage is over." She looked like she was going to cry, but I didn't care anymore. I had spent too much time feeling sorry for her, trying to be the good guy, trying to keep the peace for the kids. But I couldn't do it anymore. This wasn't about revenge or making her suffer, this was about me. About my sanity, my future. And I wasn't going to sacrifice that for a woman who had already thrown it all away. "Mike, please," she begged, her voice trembling. "I'll do anything. I'll go to counseling, I'll quit my job, I'll never see him again, I swear. Just, don't do this. Don't throw us away." I shook my head, my voice steady. "You threw us away, Sarah. This was your choice, not mine. You can't just act like none of this happened and expect me to forget it." Tears were streaming down her face now, but they didn't move me. I had seen enough of her tears, heard enough of her apologies. They meant nothing to me anymore. "What about the kids?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "What are we going to tell them?" That question hit me harder than I expected. The kids. Jake and Emily had no idea what was going on, and the thought of telling them that their parents were splitting up made my stomach turn. But what choice did I have? Staying together for the sake of the kids would only make things worse in the long run. They deserved better than to grow up in a home full of resentment and lies. "We'll tell them together," I said, my voice softening just a little. "We'll explain it to them in a way they can understand. But they need to know the truth, Sarah. We can't keep pretending everything's fine." She nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "Okay," she whispered. "We'll tell them." The next few weeks were a blur of legal meetings, paperwork, and painful conversations. We sat the kids down and told them that Mommy and Daddy weren't going to be living together anymore. It was one of the hardest things I've ever done. Jake cried, asking why we couldn't just work it out, and Emily didn't say much at all, she just looked at us with wide, confused eyes. It broke my heart, but I knew it was the right thing to do. I hired a lawyer, and we started the divorce process. Sarah didn't fight me on much, she knew she had no ground to stand on. We agreed on joint custody of the kids, with them staying with me during the week and with her on the weekends. I wasn't going to take them away from her. No matter what she had done to me, she was still their mother, and I wasn't about to put them through the pain of losing her too. The divorce was finalized quicker than I expected. There wasn't much to divide, and Sarah wasn't looking for a fight. She just looked defeated, like she had accepted that this was her fate. By the time the papers were signed, I felt a strange sense of relief, like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. The anger, the betrayal, the constant stress of living in that house with her, it was all gone now. But that relief was tinged with sadness. This wasn't how I had imagined my life would turn out. I never thought I'd be the guy signing divorce papers, splitting up my family. But sometimes life doesn't give you a choice. A few days after the divorce was finalized, I packed up the rest of my things and moved into a new apartment. It wasn't much, just a 2-bedroom place with a decent view of the city, but it was mine. I had left the house to Sarah and the kids. They needed the stability more than I did, and I didn't want to stay in a place full of bad memories. I stood in my new living room, staring out the window, wondering what was next for me. It was strange being alone again after so many years of being part of a family. But it was also freeing. I didn't have to worry about Sarah anymore, or her lies, or her guilt trips. I didn't have to pretend like everything was fine when it wasn't. It was just me now. And that was okay. I still saw the kids all the time. They came over to my apartment during the week, and we'd watch movies, play games, and try to get back to some kind of normal. It wasn't easy, and I knew it would take time for them to adjust, but we were making it work. Sarah and I were civil for the most part, keeping things focused on the kids, but I kept my distance. She had asked me once if there was any chance we could try again, but I told her no. That chapter of my life was closed. I didn't feel angry anymore. The revenge, the hatred, all of it had burned itself out. I was just done. I didn't want to hurt her anymore, and I didn't want to keep hurting myself by holding on to the past. It was time to move forward. And I did.